So this talk, because the theme is authority, I'm focusing on an exhibition that I co-curated it opened September 11th in 2015, and it was entitled Necessary Force, Art of the Police State. Now, I want you to have a little bit of patience. I don't like to have, I'll show you, PowerPoints that have lots of words. I really hate that, but mine today has lots of words, and I am sorry. But one of the reasons why there are so many words is because I decided to present this more about the process of how we created a show and the evolution of this exhibition during the time when it was a very current topic about police violence and the history of systemic oppression in terms of incarceration, gun control, and racism in the United States. And that during the year of the planning of the exhibition, more current events, more police murders occurred constantly as we were curating the show. So one of the things that I added last night when I was redoing this, I went back and found many of the emails that the other curator and I had back and forth after every news thing happened, and how we were having a dialogue not only with ourselves as curators of such a volatile subject matter, but also with the amazing contemporary artists that we were engaged with, and how they were responding to the current events as they kept happening. But you can see in there that it gives you the basic idea concerning what the show is about. Now, we started planning the show in around August 25th, 2014. And so many people have said to me, this is amazing that you were able to do a contemporary art show about something that was happening that moment. And the only reason we were able to do that, most of you know, museum shows are planned 2, 3, 5, 6 years in advance. But the reason why I had become director of the art museum was because there had been a lot of turmoil there. Many different directors, a lot of people were angry and they quit and they retired, and there had been 6 different directors in 10 years. So as dean or director of the college, I decided, after many people suggested it to me, that I, with my museum background, also become the director of the museum. So I had 2 jobs. I was the director, the dean, as you call it, director here, of the college, which has music, dance, the museum, art history, art education, and music. And then I also served for 2 full years as the director of the art museum. So when I came in, there were only 2 shows scheduled at all for the rest of the future. One was for the spring of 2015, and another one was for the spring of 2016. There was nothing else planned for the museum. And this museum has 4 galleries. So it was what I like to call, according to Homer Simpson, a crisis-opportunity. It was a crisis and an opportunity. I began being the director of the museum August 15th, 2014. And that date is significant. I have all my dates here of all the police murders. So in August 9th, 2014, 1 week before I became the director, was when Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, Missouri. And as you may know from the news, there were riots and a lot of unrest. So I came into this job with no shows, and this was all over the news. So I thought, well, maybe one of the shows I should schedule should be about police violence. And I contacted my friend, Karen Fiss, who is a professor at the California College of Art, and her specialty, you should have her come and lecture, is she does activist art internationally, mostly in Africa and Vietnam. And she went to school with Jay Oles and I at Yale University. And I called her up and I said, I need to do a show. I can't do all of this by myself. Will you join with me because of what you know and the artists that you know to do a show? And she said, this sounds great. I'd love to work with you. And I have many ideas for the artists that we could use. So that was an August 28th email that I found last night where she said, let's do it. So that was the beginning of the show. So we wanted to focus on, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 themes. And those themes, we had to keep them as our strict guidelines because there was so much that we could do. So from that moment on, when we had those themes, and as you can see them there, everything from gun violence across our country, the steady militarization of local police forces, the war on terror and on drugs, the pervasive role of surveillance in the public and private life, institutionalized racism and class discrimination, the growth of the prison industry and its relationship to poverty and underfunded education, public health care, and its adequate treatment of mental illness and drug abuse, and the role of sensationalist news media and how it informs and inflames and desensitizes all of us to violence. So I know that's narrowed down to 8 huge topics, right? But it did keep us on task, right? And so from that moment on, every time we thought of an object that we wanted in the show, we would have to say, check the themes. We can only have something that addresses the themes. And then that also guided us when we didn't have enough for one theme, then we would go and look for a work of art, or we'd contact an artist that we know and say, do you have something about, mental illness and police violence? And we actually did find people that had stuff like that. So for me, as the dean of the college and the director of the museum, I am a state employee. So the University of New Mexico is a public institution. It has about 30,000 undergraduates, students there, and it is the largest public institution in the state of New Mexico. It's the flagship of the university system. So why I'm telling you that is that it is looked to quite often as the beacon of terrible things, the beacon of great things. It is constantly a focus for the newspapers, for the legislators, everyone in New Mexico. So when I decided to do this show, that was another reason why these themes had to be adhered to. And every work of art that we chose, we would sit down and we would say, how do I defend this in the Albuquerque Journal a year from now? I'm serious. So we took lots of notes with every work, and those works that were rejected were often because I couldn't defend it enough. It just was a little too flimsy or too inflammatory without a really good soundbite of description. And so within about a month before the show, I heard someone said, I hear a rumor that you have a police-hating show that's going to be on campus. And that was, so we had a line for that. We had scripts. I said, this is not an anti-police show. And this was in the article in the newspaper. It's an anti-gun violence show. It's an anti-poor health care for mental illness show. It's an anti-poverty show. It's an anti-racism show. So that was the kind of message, because everyone was very on high alert that this was about hating cops. And you'll see in the brochure, it's one of the first lines that this isn't about bad cops. It's about systemic, institutionalized problems that go back for centuries that have led to this very fractious tension between citizens and the police. It's not about the police. And one thing you should also know in Albuquerque, that in March 2014, a man who was severely mentally ill named James Boyd was shot and killed by the police in Albuquerque. And that was why everyone thought this was a James Boyd anti-police show, but it was more about putting in context everything that was happening in Albuquerque, to show that this is a continuum. And that was something that the curator and I were really focused on, was to try and move away from the sensationalism of all of the televised murders that were happening with people's phones and the lapel cams that the cops wore, that you were constantly seeing video of people being murdered by cops. And we wanted to show that for many marginalized people in the United States, this is a reality that has been going on for a very long time. It wasn't something just from 2014. Or if we go back to Trayvon Martin, 2010, right? That this is something that is not new. It's just that the media has made it quite new. As I mentioned, the dates are August 28th, 2014, I decide to do this show. And the next year was pretty rough with terms of police deaths, police shootings. So as I mentioned, March 6th was James Boyd, the Albuquerque one. And July 17th, 2014 was Eric Garner in New York City, who was killed as a vendor in a chokehold. There was August 9th, 2014, Mike Brown in Ferguson. April 4th, 2015 was Walter Scott, who was the very highly replayed again and again. He was shot in the back as he ran away in South Carolina, and it was recorded by a bystander's iPhone. April 12th, 2015 was Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and he died in the back of the wagon when he was arrested with a broken neck because of how they drove so recklessly. And July 13th, 2015 was Sandra Bland, who was the African-American woman in Texas who died in police custody after being stopped for her light being out, and it was ruled a suicide. And July 19th, 2015 was Sam DuBose, who was shot again on camera by the University of Cincinnati police, and that was one of the most, I think, very close up, you could see him being shot in the head as his car pulled away by the police from his lapel cam. And it kind of goes on. Those are just some that I pulled. So that was the year. We started August 2014, and the show was slated to open September 11th, 2015.